They're rolling out a 30-year tax exemption.
And this blew my mind.
But I mean, Egypt, Morocco, these are massive growth markets. This is the fun bits, right? It's just really exciting.
Welcome to The Conversation. In today's episode of Trailblazers, Johnny is speaking to Marcus Siddons, expert in digital media and marketing technology. They discuss the many business opportunities in an evolving Middle East. We hope you enjoy the episode and be sure to subscribe.
Marcus, pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
So obviously today we're going to be talking about a few opportunity spaces that are presenting themselves, particularly in Saudi and the UAE region.
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the tailwinds that are really driving the expansion for many businesses out there?
I think there are many, and I should perhaps sort of caveat for the audience sort of my biases and background on this a little bit. But no, I think most emerging markets, particularly the Middle East, I would say, are just super exciting. And you know, like you said, there are numerous tailwinds, and I think the demographics is perhaps the biggest of those, particularly for many of the things we're going to talk about today. Super young demographic. Oil price, I think, is low. I think that's got upside. I think there's a lack of competition in many categories, many verticals, and I think the low tax nature of most of those markets is really advantageous to many businesses.
Yeah, we can talk through each of these different points. I think, you know, let's talk a little bit first and foremost about the oil prices and how that essentially plays out as an investment across the rest of the landscape. Yeah.
Well, look, I'm no oil trader, so don't quiz me on my positions on such things. But I think, you know, the oil price, I think, definitely has been held down, partially through OPEC over the last year or so, and I think it's definitely got some upside. And it doesn't need to be much upside to see those revenues drive government spending. So most of those Gulf states, most would know this, of course, are driven by oil and gas revenue. So that price goes up by 10%. You know, you do typically see a direct correlation with investment in government infrastructure projects and a whole variety of projects. You know, having spent 10 years in the Middle East, predominantly in the sort of technology and advertising space, you know, we saw a direct correlation with ad spend and the oil price.
Yeah.
You know, so I think, and I think it can be very tricky when the oil price is depressed, because, you know, contracts are fewer and far between, and everyone cuts back.
I was going to say, what's your experience with the digital landscape as it stands in Saudi, for example?
Johnny, that's a big question. I mean, I think it remains super exciting. We've touched on this before. I think, you know, you could look at any number of stats as to the upside potential of the sort of media industry in Saudi. I think there are many factors that can make it quite challenging. But again, I think if we just take a sort of step back to that demographic piece, you know, you've got circa 40% of the population under 25. You know, these are like stats that are almost inverse to the Western world. Yeah. So you've got a young, hungry population that are hugely active on social. You know, it's why the likes of, you know, Snap, Instagram have huge businesses out there, really high growth businesses out there, you know, for that very reason. And they have disposable income, you know. I would argue far more so than most youth populations in the Western world. So, you know, really exciting for businesses to sort of capitalise on that. I think, you know, and we'll come on to this, there's lots to talk about. I think the reality sometimes of sort of executing, whether they be campaigns or design and development projects or whatever it might be, can be harder than sometimes people appreciate, however. You know, and I think, you know, again, we touched on it, it's why so many tend to base themselves out of the UAE, perhaps Bahrain or Abu Dhabi, and then, you know, enter Saudi that way.
Given the shift towards the end of the year, obviously we've spoken about this. Do you think that that's going to change? Do you think more companies may have their hands slightly forced in terms of putting a base out in there?
Yeah, I think they're going to have to. We talked about this, but I mean, this was only last week, in fact. I think it was Thursday last week, just announced that they're rolling out a 30-year tax exemption for corporations registering their regional HQ out of Saudi Arabia. So, and this is a direct reaction, really, to what the UAE, frankly, were doing 20 years ago, more than that now. UAE and most of the Gulf states have now introduced corporation tax, anything from sort of 5 to 15%. VAT was introduced in the UAE in particular in 2016. So Saudi, I think, sees an opportunity here to sort of go in as the super low tax opportunity in the region. And I think the other Gulf states, UAE is obviously the sort of one we often refer back to, just because they've been so proactive. And I think they've built that infrastructure. They've built, in many respects, much of the media industry. So they're almost in a position to, quite rightly, introduce what are still very low corporation tax rates in those countries. So, it's fascinating. We can't avoid the fact, however, that Saudis still have the deepest pockets, by a long, long way.
100%.
And their population, what is the Saudi population? Circa 32 million.
I think it's 32.
32 million.
Last of checking.
Now, remember, about 40% of that are an immigrant population. However, it's still a big population relative to the other Gulf states. So, there's a big opportunity there.
Yeah, I mean, from our side of things, it presents a fantastic opportunity, and it's a horizon that we're very much keen to explore, especially within the digital transformation of their healthcare landscape and the investment that's been put forward obviously as part of, the Saudi Vision 2023 and some of the, 2030 and some of those amazing projects.
Yes.
And it's really exciting where we're seeing within that space, potentially what might be a future vision of healthcare in terms of, the Sia Hospital being the first virtual hospital that combines 160 different hospitals across the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia into one place, and truly seeing that digital innovation carrying through in those types of projects. If that's a waymarker or an indicator as to the other possibilities of digital transformation across the whole landscape, it is an incredibly exciting place and time to have a business looking towards that region.
Yeah, and we touched on this earlier, but I mean, I think again, I'm also a director of a construction business, a family construction business based out of Bahrain, but very active across the region. And Saudi Arabia, everyone has talked about Saudi for 20 years as to how exciting it is. And I think at times it's been very tricky in that you invest money and you don't always see a return on that because there's a delay on contracts or whatever it might be. I would say certainly in the last 6 months now, there is massive acceleration. Teams on the ground, many of these big giga projects are not press releases. We're digging big holes. These are things that are really happening. So
boots are on the ground.
Boots are genuinely on the ground, and invoices are being paid. People are really, really pushing. So I think this is, for those that are willing to take a calculated risk, I think now is the time. And another big theme I think we'll probably come back to, but I think also when we've got potentially all sorts of elections kicking off globally, UK, US, the big ones, and many others, business, there might be some uncertainty, I suspect, in the next few years in the Western world. So I think some calculated risks in emerging markets is a very smart thing for brands and businesses to look at.
Yeah, I agree entirely. And actually, one of the questions that I had percolating as you were talking then was, you said that it's changed over the last 6 months, and realistically, I'm thinking to myself, well, why does it, we're talking about a place for 20 years, why does it all of a sudden happen in one massive cascade? And then as you say, we've got 70 plus elections happening this year, a lot of uncertainty. Economic markets and forces are, not particularly favourable for many businesses, but looking for some stability. And so you have a region that's presenting a lot of investment, in future-facing innovation, in presenting an opportunity to have reinvestment of corporations tax, or other allocation of funds that would historically be put into another pot. It presents a very exciting opportunity, and particularly with such a young demographic. How do you see the younger generation in Saudi kind of being really engaged in the potential movement of brands out there? How can they capitalize, or what might they work towards with those younger audiences to capture that market share when they go out there, if they take that calculated risk so that they protect their interests longer term?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think again, the local populations. Let's talk Saudi, because that's the sort of best example, perhaps, and best documented. Really, I think the whole Saudiization sort of project over the last 15, 20 years has been, I would argue, a mixed success, and I think for many Western businesses trying to establish themselves in Saudi has been challenging at times. But I think what I've seen, certainly in the last few years, is almost a new breed of young Saudis and young people from the Gulf in general, who are really well educated. They've often travelled. They've done perhaps some of their postgraduate studies internationally, and they come back ready to really make an impact on their home countries. Yeah. So I think when you combine young, energetic individuals with ideas with businesses that have come out of London or wherever it might be, you get a really interesting melting pot of great ideas. So, and I certainly saw that, and I perhaps should explain that, I lived out in Dubai for 10 years and ran a business that was spread over sort of 15, 20 countries in the region. So I was directly involved with hiring a lot of people across all of those markets. And it was exactly that. I think we had the most extraordinary mixture of bright local talent mixed with some of the best bits, I would argue, of sort of Western businesses. With sort of, should we say, less of the baggage, less of the corporate baggage. So you almost got the best of both worlds. Yeah, I've sort of answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems that way, and this is where I think I come from. And you got the ability to kind of see that transition and the build up of Dubai for that 10-year period.
Yeah.
How quickly do you think, now that they've got the blueprint, so to speak, almost, if you look at Dubai, how quickly realistically do you think Saudi's gonna get to that echelon? Because as you've already pointed out, they've got that young population, they're hungry, they're well educated, they want to incite and impact change. You've got deeper pockets than anywhere else in the region. And, it's an incredibly attractive opportunity for businesses that want to go out there now that the, corporations tax is in Dubai and, and VAT.
Yeah.
How quickly, realistically, do you think that Saudi is going to take off to get up to that level?
I don't know the answer to that, to be honest, but I think anecdotally, it feels very different to me. This last 6-12 months really feels different. It's real, and if I go back over the last 10 or 15 years of living in the Middle East, the number of very well-known household businesses that we all know that have crashed and burned trying to get businesses off the ground in Saudi, there are numerous ones, right? And these are businesses that have, are not particularly worried about the costs. They saw the opportunity. I think it's very different now. I think they're getting traction, and these businesses are beginning to scale. I think what's also a massive sort of potentially a tailwind as well that we've not talked about is this sort of almost, and we risk turning this into a sort of a geopolitics chat, but is this almost this pivot to the east, right? And I think this plays into much of the things that are going on in the world right now. But the Chinese influence in Saudi in particular is growing. I think that sort of collaboration potentially between Russia, the Chinese, and Saudi, is building, like it or not, and I think the way that many of the sort of oil and gas deals are being executed, trying to, in some cases, not settle in dollars, is going to create a degree of chaos, I think, for a little while. However, what it means is I think this role of the Saudis playing almost second fiddle to the US is changing, right? And I think what kicked off with the sort of Abraham Accords, and I think this sort of long-held pact going back 60 years with the use the sort of closing of petrochemical deals in the dollar is changing. It will take time to change, but I think the Saudi have lots of people. They have lots of people they can turn to now, to work with and collaborate with. So I think that's a tailwind for Saudi, like it or not. So I think they've got plenty of upside, and I think the push into tourism, and we've not really talked about this, but I think the push into tourism is very real. They've got some stunning places
and stunning projects as well.
And the hotels that are being developed right now are extraordinary. So they're dead serious about this.
Yeah, and I think the world sees that, and it does present an awful lot of opportunities for, as you say, that calculated risk for people to make. You've often spoken with myself about this as well, that the challenges of actually taking that leap can be a little bit more tricky than people might want to believe. But what's your insight on that, and what should people be aware of maybe when they're thinking about, okay, I see the opportunity, I want to take that risk, I'm an entrepreneurial individual, and I see that there's something to be done here. What should I be, having in the forefront of my mind?
Yeah, I can't answer this for everybody, but I can tell you how I've cocked it up in the past, perhaps.
You know what? That's the best way of learning, and it's tried and tested at least.
I think it's a little bit like any business plan. Any business or brand that is launching a new product or service. We all put together a business plan, and we often get a little bit carried away with the size of markets, the size of particular segments, and we get hung up on this sort of universe size, don't we? And I think emerging markets can often be very like that. We can look at, oh my gosh, look at the demographics, look at the size of this market, look at the lack of competition, all very real, I think sometimes we take for granted the ease of transacting in the West, of getting things paid, of working with our bank, of raising finance. There are many very positive things that have taken tens and tens of years to establish, and I think it's often those very things that can slow you down in emerging markets. So you think you can spin up that office in 8 weeks, and then you suddenly find it actually takes you 5-6 months. For smaller businesses in particular, these are significant costs that really, really hurt. And even when I've established businesses for big groups, I've often made the mistake of saying to the guys in London, we'll be cash flow positive, guys, in 3 months. This is what we're going to do. We've got the registration is moving forward. We've got the, X guys on the ground. He's pushing it forward. And it's taken us 12 months.
Wow.
So I think, for very real reasons, but I think things can just take longer than people expect, right? And I've been burned by that a few times.
Yep.
Beyond that 12-month window, it's been really exciting and things have really, really grown. But I think things can take a lot longer than we all expect. And then I think sometimes the environment of hiring can be quite challenging. I think I found that challenging in the past. I think you do, and again, sometimes not everyone likes to hear this, but I think having that, like any team, you need a real mixture of talent. So you need those young Saudis, and I think you do often need a mixture of some guys from the UK or Europe somewhere mixed in there. And I think that melting pot, you bring the best of all ideas together. So I think that's worked well as well for me. But also the hiring process can take time. The processing of visas, often people aren't familiar with this, can take time. UAE is actually super quick now. So actually UAE is a walk in the park. I think Saudi can still take longer. I think establishing entities in Saudi, although it's rapidly changing, as we just talked about, in many verticals, you'll still need a local partner. You know, those are not 10-minute conversations.
Of course not.
And they take time to establish. So I think you need to be quite astute and calculated in how you're looking at that sort of opportunity.
Yeah, from what I'm taking, that is deliberate, be patient, and really do your due diligence and make sure that you are very intentional in the way that you approach things. And I think that with the hiring side of things, that is something that we touched on previously in an episode with Danny, where he talked about cognitive diversity and the importance of that to build successful teams. Yeah. You know, as you say, you're going to have the local talented Saudi, you're going to have potentially some chaps from Europe or maybe other parts of Asia as well, and that all comes together in this beautiful melting pot.
Yes.
And you touched on something else there, which is obviously the transacting side of things.
Yeah.
And I know that we've spoken about this again a lot of, and this blew my mind, that there's a certain amount or certain percentage of transactions that are paid on delivery.
Yes.
Which and cash on delivery.
Cash on delivery, yeah.
So I think that's a really interesting space as well, and presents a lot of opportunity, in terms of a switching over, a cultural shift that we might see more towards, credit cards being trusted or online transactions. And then there was another amazing statistic that you threw at me earlier about, only 10% market share for e-com.
Less than that. Yes, that's correct. Yeah. And I think the cash on delivery thing is fascinating, isn't it?
It's incredible.
I think that's been the case for a long time. And I always associated it with Egypt, and I'd forgotten that it was so high in Saudi. I think it's circa 55% of e-com transactions are still settled cash on delivery in Saudi. So it does also, it's a living example of how the big boys, the Amazons of this world, whilst much of their infrastructure is exemplary and better than many of the local players, it's often very difficult for them to swoop in and clean up, So there are local players in that space that remain quite dominant. But actually the Egypt point is another, if I could just jump back to the previous point, really, I think this is really interesting and really important, actually. We talk a lot about the Gulf states, Saudi, Bahrain, Qatar, etc. But that whole strip of North Africa is super exciting as well. And I think one of the other things I learned is you almost can get carried away with wanting offices and people and legal entities and all the rest of it. And sometimes you have to, but I think sometimes just trying to minimize that and be really smart about building a business from one hub, be that Saudi or perhaps it's UAE, and building a regional business off the back of that, and then trying to be really disciplined about not opening new legal entities in 3 other places. I think, if you really think that through carefully, can be a very smart way to do it. And I'm saying that from somebody that's had to unwind many legal entities that were just costs that weren't really essential, that came out of historic, trading relationships or whatever they might be. But particularly if you're starting afresh, I think you can be really clean and focused in that respect. And there are many smart ways where you can run a business out of Saudi or even out of UAE, a regional business, and then you avoid boots on the ground within reason, But I mean, Egypt, Morocco, these are massive growth markets, that many of our sort of European competitors just don't think about, just don't look at.
Which seems crazy when you've got such an amazing launch pad, as you say. You have these places you can set up in one place, but have access to an entire, an incredible region to grow and expand into, which is, in many cases, it's not virgin territory, but it's as close to virgin territory as you're going to get in some situations. Yeah. When you're talking about e-com being less than 10%, and you think about how much of the UK economy is stimulated and galvanized by e-com, anyone that has any sort of entrepreneurial mindset is surely seeing, well, hang on a minute here, done well, executed well with a well thought out plan with some patience, some ability to respond to the local nuances and understand the way in which it works and build something compelling as an offering, you would stand yourself in some seriously good stead to take a significant chunk of that market share.
Yeah, and look, I look at this every day through my business Aurelius, and we're Amazon focused, and a lot of what we do is looking at these international markets. So we look at Saudi, we look at Egypt, where Amazon is operating, and we look at specific categories. We look at search volumes, we look at gross margins, we look at what average CPCs are looking like in many of these markets, and of course it varies massively by category. But the opportunities in some of these markets are massive. We look at how competitive, whatever it might be, supplements or grocery is, in the UK. You only need a very tiny piece of some of these categories in these markets to have a meaningful business, and a fraction of your competitors are out there just because they've not figured it out. And of course, the benefit of many of these sort of marketplaces like Amazon, and you can do the same thing with many others, is these are almost closed loop systems where you can look at the data of these categories and make quite an informed decision as to, which of those North African markets do we want to go into. So yeah, really exciting.
It is, and it makes in the interest of de-risking strategy.
Yeah.
It's a very sensible and pragmatic approach to take. As you say, you can look at that data and you can determine, okay, what's the segment that I want to go into? Where do I want to own something and de-risk that as much as possible? It's easy to do.
It is, and you're not going to go into 5 markets, but the way we always talk about it is, look, let's just get the UK rock solid. Let's make sure we've got a rock solid business. Let's get the benchmarks right. Let's get everything firing on all cylinders. And then we prioritize, because often, an export strategy for many brands, and I'm talking typically about sort of consumer brands, mostly grocery, really, is often, perhaps I shouldn't say this, but is often, well, I've got a mate that's got a distributor in Australia. Let's do that, and often these deals are brokered on that basis, rather than actually looking at some very simple data points and saying, actually, the opportunity in this much smaller market, perhaps less sexy market, but
the yield is
significantly higher.
Yeah, that's absolutely crazy.
This is almost like, talking to finance friends, this is like this is the way a bond trader would look at the global bond market, right? They'd look at where the yields are.
Yep.
And they'd exploit those opportunities. It's funny. I think we seem to do less of that in the e-com world, at least.
Yeah, it really does seem that way, and it's entirely bananas to me, especially as as we've touched on. We've got particular vertices, I think, within that market as well, and these are based on the demographic data as well. 60% of the population under 40. There is somewhat of an obesity issue.
Yes.
And lifestyle factors and things like that, obviously, hence where the interest from the healthcare side of things from our lens comes into. But touching on that, you mentioned like supplements, for example, huge investment in sports and bringing these global superstars to play football, massive investment in boxing matches and mixed martial arts and all sorts of tournaments that are going on. Anyone that has that lens could quite easily see, well, there's a nice little slot here that surely would enable a significant business.
You're getting me excited just thinking about it, because we work with a major supplements brand at the moment, and there are times where you look at the UK market and it's scary how competitive it is and how tight margins are.
Well, this is it. It's easy to spin up. In such a mature market as the UK, it's so easy to spin something up, and the likelihood is that your idea is that new and innovative is really small. And in many cases, it comes down to execution. Really, the successful company is just able to execute that much better than its competitors.
Yes, quite.
And that will also normally be based on other factors or things that they can leverage. And one of those will be the ability to spend more, which is why bigger brands can often trump smaller players. Simply by the fact that they can just outspend them on marketing.
Yes.
And you yet have a market that is available to you, not saturated in such a way, still plentiful opportunity, and it's not being looked at in a really meaningful way just yet. it's just
well, and the other side to this that we don't really talk about, this is the fun bits, right? It's just really exciting. I mean, I used to get such a kick from flying into Beirut or Casablanca, and your boots on the ground, and you're
feeling
trying
to.
You've got 2 days to figure it out, and you meet a whole range of really interesting characters and exciting people, and this is what business should be about. And I forget, we all forget this sometimes. We're in the trenches, aren't we? And we're sort of fighting and trying to grow a business. That it almost should be that sort of, old days of adventure and going out there to sort to find spices in the Caribbean. That's what it should be about. And we all forget it sometimes, don't we?
Well, this is exactly. I take the exact same view as you. It should be an adventure, and that's how it's. Many times. And I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday about this. And in the design world, the artists need to suffer for their craft.
Yes.
I don't think we always need to suffer. I think we can actually have the adventure, and we can enjoy the experience, and we can really enjoy the kind of, the exciting possibilities that lay in front of us, and operate at that kind of frontier. And constantly push that envelope. Yeah, that's such an amazing opportunity that we have. And
yeah, Johnny, you're absolutely right. And the other way that I was thinking about this over the weekend, I think sometimes, particularly when things are quite challenging, and I would argue they are in the UK at the moment, in business, that you sometimes get it in your head that everything's really hard and everything's really technical. And just got to, I've got to work 24 hours a day to make this work. And you often find, and nobody says this, but it's the reality, in many emerging markets, you get a simple proposition, you get it right, just like you said, you execute it well, simply, but well. The opportunities are huge. And often you don't need to work that hard. And I'm not talking people out of working their socks off, but what I mean is the opportunity to make significant sums of money and penetrate exciting markets is huge. And I think, when you're toiling away, you sometimes forget that. And I think the other area that I just find so exciting, and everybody I talk to, I try and sort of psych up about this, is, if I was 21 again, and I'd just finished university, or I'd been really smart and not gone to university, and was looking at what I was going to do next, I'd be straight on a plane, somewhere crazy. I would. I mean, Dubai's not really crazy anymore, but I think Cairo, I think parts of North Africa, if you go out there as a Brit or an American or a French guy or girl, whoever you are, you stand out instantly. Because there aren't many of you there.
This is one of the funniest things. So I will profess to one thing. One of the things that actually enabled me to launch the business was that, simply put, I was the only designer that ever turned up in suits. So when I turn up for interviews or I turn up to client meetings, everyone's expecting this guy to be in a t-shirt, jeans and trainers, and I turn up in a 3-piece suit. They'd be like, well, if I'm nothing else, I'm memorable. So, turning up as a Westerner to Cairo or some of these markets, as you say, you stick out. And that provides you with an opportunity, if you have that growth mindset, that abundance mindset, to be like, I just want to meet good people, because so much of business is just connecting with people and seizing the opportunities and seeing the opportunities that are in front of you, which there will be, and they will present themselves. With that being said, are there particular things in terms of like cultural nuances based from your own experience that you should probably be aware of, or things that you maybe want to consider when you're thinking about like that move out into those places? If you're going to set up a business, I'm thinking specifically here about negotiation of deals, or things that you might want to be have that, again, due diligence, patience, intentional mindset with.
I think many of them are just sort of age-old foundational values, I would argue. But I think you're right. You do need to sort of tweak your approach. I think a sort of, super aggressive sales, getting a deal closed approach, in my experience, it's not my style anyway.
No.
But doesn't work in emerging markets, I would argue. I think diplomacy gets you a long way. And I think, I I'm very proud that I had 10 years out there and managed a wonderful business, quite a large business. And I think a lot of that success was through actually just being very diplomatic, very straightforward, and very direct about, the good bits, the bad bits. This is working, this isn't working. This is a great service. It's not so great in these areas, And I think very quickly people just trust that you're going to get stuff done. So for me, that was what we sort of built our success on. And then I think, again, what I learned is I think having boots on the ground in particular markets matters. It shows a commitment to people there. But then beyond that, I think once you've got 6-12 months in and you've got, a few clients and you've got a fledgling business, I think quite quickly handing over to a team that are on the ground and our locals is really important. I think that matters. If it was me doing it all over again, which I am in a variety of ways, you want to be out there for several months yourself because, unless we're talking about major businesses here, I think many smaller businesses are built on our own characters.
100%.
So you got to do that. So, and then I think just to build on your point, I think it also depends. I think where you are, I think the Gulf states, it requires a very different style to certainly North Africa. We haven't talked about South Africa. South Africa is obviously a very different part of the world, but is also exciting in a variety of other ways. But I think, North Africa, I think Tunisia, Egypt require a different style. I would argue a slower style in some respects. Mm-hmm. I think the Gulf states require a very diplomatic, collaborative approach. So I think you just have to adapt that.
Be flexible in the approach, and as you say, it's not about that hard sell. It's about actually, and that's not a way in which, as you say, it's not something that you would do as a business style. I don't think it really works in today's world anyway.
Sure.
I think many people have evolved far beyond that as a way that they respond to things. Gone are the pushy salesman days. It's more about what's the genuine value that you bring, and if you are demonstrable and you can actually do that, then I think you're able to prove that point, and it will yield the success for you long term. Are there places or particular niches that you think, or areas that you're excited about? Obviously, the whole landscape itself is exciting, and there's numerous projects with, Saudi Vision 2030 and stuff like that.
Yes.
Are there particular areas or industries that you are, really excited about what they may do within that region?
There are multiple. I think over-the-counter pharma is something I'm really excited about in general, particularly the Gulf states, I would say. So I think that area is interesting. We've talked a fair bit about healthcare. I think that speaks for itself. I think tremendous opportunities there. And I think Dubai, Abu Dhabi are kind of almost the template there in some respects. So I think those areas are exciting. And I think North Africa, I keep talking about.
No.
But I think North Africa, particularly around consumer goods and grocery, I think is really, I'm looking at the numbers as we speak, is really interesting, really exciting. Again, you've got vast populations there. The Egyptian population dwarfs that of Saudi. People don't realise this. It's a vast population. Of course, they don't have disposable income, and they've got ongoing major inflation problems. So there are all sorts of headwinds there. We've not talked a lot about headwinds, and there are many, right? Either way, you've got huge opportunities there. And we used to do a lot of work with the likes of, in a past life, with the likes of Nestle and GSK and many others. Their Egyptian businesses were very healthy, significant businesses. So I think those are the areas I'd look at. And I think we touched on it before, completely different, but obviously construction in Saudi. We've talked about forever, but it's happening. It's really, really happening. And this fuels everything we're talking about, really, because that infrastructure piece is essential.
Well, this is exactly. I used this analogy. I was talking to someone else previously, and I used the analogy about within a healthcare system about pockets of innovation and having these amazing fighter jets and trying to land them on a dirt track in the middle of nowhere. You're completely right in that you need the infrastructure. So that's going to come kind of the workers that will do that, the architects, and the architecture that I have seen plans for is just it's like something out of a Tron, sci-fi film. It's absolutely amazing. And so you're completely right. All of that infrastructure is going to be there. All of that expertise, that vacuum is being created because the investment is there, and the template's been laid. I think for me, I think it's very much now. It's just execution for Saudi. It's like get the right people, make sure that they have bought into the vision, and let's just execute. And the opportunities that I see out there, as I say, within so many of the things that you've spoken about, and particularly within healthcare, is it really can be a blueprint of a future for, a future-facing vision for many of the societal challenges that we might be having.
It is in healthcare. Again, sort of this is a little bit anecdotal, but I think we could back it up as well. Is the number of bright people working in healthcare, particularly doctors and nurses, that I know and have met. Particularly really experienced individuals that perhaps go out there in the latter end of their careers. So you find that many of these hospitals in Saudi and in the UAE are full of some, the best of the best doctors, both, obviously locals, but also, those that have been trained in the UK or the US. So there's a real melting pot of talent. And again, I talk a lot about sort of flying into the likes of Beirut and interesting places. The number of exciting people you meet on some of these planes going in to do extraordinary things, that's worth it in itself. And some of the characters I met over the years, I remember meeting, there's lots of ones. I remember meeting a guy that built a tremendously successful creative agency. He was French, based out of Tunis, in Tunisia. And he got bought by one of the big groups. Lots of stories of, all sorts of interesting sort of, I guess it was 5-8 years ago now where the sort of Just Eats and etc. were taking off. The number of local operators coming out of Jordan or wherever who had built small businesses and got hoovered up by the big groups. There is nothing wrong with many of these localized versions of global successes. I have no problem with that. If you can execute that and make that work. And there's lots of examples of that in all sorts of categories, So I think, I've seen many people just say, well, actually, this is working really well in London. But I'm fighting with 20 other competitors. Well, I'm just going to up sticks and I'm going to launch that in X, country.
Yeah, well, this is exactly it. You have an opportunity that is, as I say, it's as close to a virgin market as you're going to get in many of these regards. So we've obviously extolled a lot of the positives and a lot of the reasons to go, and probably I'll be booking my plane ticket after this. But in the interest of balance, are there any challenges that you see that we, shouldn't shy away from, or be in the interest, as I say, of balance, making people aware of if they're considering this, things that they might want to really think about?
Yeah, there are many, and I think I can talk from painful experience on many of these. I think the term calculated risk is a very good one. I think you have to be very deliberate in the way that you run a business out there. You have to be very careful. Remember, debt remains a problem in that part of the world. You can't run up monstrous debts. You still can't bounce checks. I think, whether these things are enforced often varies. But I have many very real stories of very good friends that have got themselves in all sorts of trouble out there. You can't just go to your bank and extend an overdraft.
Maintain cash positivity at all times.
So you have to be very careful with management of cash, definitely. I think employment law can be tricky. I think you need to operate very carefully in that. I think all of your team. Remember, people forget this. In Dubai, Saudi, we talked about 40% immigrant population. I forget what the numbers are for Dubai now, but it's 85 perhaps, 85% of the population. So, it's very few people's actual home, so everybody's on a visa. That visa is renewed every 2, 3, or maybe 10 years, depending on what it is. So there are costs and admin that comes with this, and it can be really quite painful at times. And there are all sorts of great businesses that will help you run these things. Regardless, I don't care what anybody says, it's a pain, right? And I think there are sometimes times in your life where you tire of that. So I think that can be a challenge. And I think maintaining a team or even just building a home can be tricky because these are such transitional places. People are coming and going all the time. So I think some of it's about what life stage you're at, and I think, I think the time I lived out there, it was just fabulous because, I was younger and
still young,
sort of, newly married and was up for an adventure, I think if you've got children and schooling, I think perhaps it's a different equation for some people, and that was certainly what drove me to move back with my family to the UK again. But what other tailwinds are there? An interesting one that again is not talked about a lot: currency risk. This is a very real one, right? So you find that when you live in emerging markets, wherever they might be, you become brilliant at managing currencies. It's really exciting. I think it's a really fascinating world. But you end up transacting in multiple currencies. And remember, most of the Gulf currencies are pegged to the dollar, right? But you've also got massive inflation rates in much of North Africa, and you have withholding taxes in many of these countries. So, you get paid $100,000 by a client in X country. You can't just instantly move it into your UK branch office, for example. So you have to be very careful in the way that you manage operating capital, And I've seen that both as a sort of an investor in small businesses there and also running very large businesses. You end up running either really significant overdraft facilities just so you've got operating capital to manage such things. So I think particularly if you're a smaller business, you have to be very careful and on top of that. Basic stuff, a lot of people will get into bed with one of the big banks, quite rightly. But I think you have to be very smart and make sure you've got, I would argue, a third-party currency broker, where you pay a fraction of what you would with the big banks. So a lot of these are 101s, but I think are things to be very aware of.
Yeah, that's definitely word to the wise. I think these are all practicalities that in the excitement you often, the excitement to explore that new opportunity would probably fall by the wayside and then you become a cropper of it later. Yeah. As you say, numerous friends who have fallen foul of those situations. And I definitely know that the cash flow one is particularly important and not running up a big old tab. Yeah. Marcus,
we complain. Sorry, Johnny, but we complain a lot sometimes about all of us about payment terms in the UK. Well, they're very different in much of the Middle East.
Absolutely, Marcus, this has been absolutely wonderful. It's super insightful, and I am actually about to book my ticket. This is absolutely fantastic. What can people expect from you next?
Yes, lots of things. So we're building out a tool at the moment that will help project the opportunity by category, Amazon specific, focused on emerging markets. So brands that are running successful UK businesses. We really want to be that sort of leader in projecting what the opportunity is in emerging markets and then helping to execute that. So trying to follow through on what we're talking about today.
Amazing. When are you expecting to launch it?
Q2, early Q2.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Well, that was absolutely sensational. Marcus, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I am super stoked about this, super excited, and I hope that everyone at home has enjoyed it. And please like and subscribe wherever you are, and we'll see you soon.